If there's any country on Earth that understands Christmas, I think America would have a heavyweight bout for its life against Russia. Russians have celebrated Christmas incredibly hard since back when it was a pagan society. And it's only grown more affectionate to this beloved time of year as the iterations of this country has grown. If you're too nervous to come to Russia in the winter because of the cold, don't be. As I've come to learn myself, Russians have cold cheeks but warm hearts. Sure, it's cold, but I grew up in Colorado and it's really not that much colder or snowier here than what I experienced growing up. So hopefully this video will be a little bit of reassurance for those hesitant to make the travel this year. What exactly would Christmas in Moscow look like if you decided to finally visit that extended family member or meet that special someone for the first time? That's what this video is all about. I wanted to make a video of just a simple Christmas weekend in Moscow, all filmed during the holidays to show you what it really looks like on the ground. And I've excluded Red Square and St. Petersburg at Christmas time because, well, I did a video of that already last Christmas. If you're interested in what both of those places are like at Christmas time, I'll leave a link in the comment section down below and you can check it out for yourself. So for your first day, you'll be arriving at Domodedovo, and you'll probably be catching the metro to one of the many beautiful parts of the city that's already decorated to the tens this time of year. You'll see lights, Lenin, as well as love as you walk around the parks, taking in what everyone is seeing and doing. You'll see a wash of Imperial, Orthodox, Soviet, as well as modern architecture, all dressed like a Christmas fairy tale from your childhood. So once you finish my Red Square video and seen it for yourself, you'll probably want to go behind Red Square to Nikolskaya Street. It's one of the most iconic areas I can think of when I was back in Moscow during Christmas. Most of these shops even go back to the days when czars and empresses walked these very streets, shopping for gifts for their little duke and duchess nieces and nephews. From there, you'll take a one-stop trip in the metro over to the Lenin Library, where you'll get a great overlook of Red Square and the river embankment. You'll see the old Pskov house right when you step outside, which was built by a former nobleman of Russia in 1784 before it was nationalized during the Soviet times into part of the state library. Don't get stuck looking at it though, because we have more to do. A hop, skip, and a jump away from there is the Alexander Pushkin Museum, which is only a couple minutes walk away. Pushkin is considered one of the most famous authors of Russia, and to many Russians, he's often the most famous, beating out Dostoevsky and Tolstoy by a mile. But this isn't his museum. It's merely named after him as a credit to the artist himself. The real treasure here isn't Pushkin, it's the art and culture that this museum houses, with many original as well as replica pieces from around the world. And if you're asking yourself, why are there so many replicas in a museum? During Soviet times, many people couldn't travel broadly or freely like they wanted to. And the Soviets viewed learning from all of these different parts of history as essential to building up their empire. So many Soviet artists went and made moldings and casts of the original to bring back to the Soviet Union to help educate the next generation of artists, of architects, or really just anyone interested in seeing a replica of the David or the Notre Dame archway. But this isn't a museum of replicas, although the replicas here have historical significance. It has far more originals than copies, and it's got content from all over the world. Art, architecture, and relics from Greece, Rome, England, Egypt, and even Persia are here to bring the ancient world a little closer to you for the cost of some pocket change. When you step out from there and gaze over the neoclassical horizon, you'll see our next site looming. This place is arguably the most iconic site in all of Russian Orthodoxy, the Christ the Savior Cathedral. Standing 103 meters tall, this megalith of faith might surprise some of you to know that it's sadly not original. The original building, which looked exactly like this, was first declared to be built by Alexander I after Napoleon retreated from Moscow in 1812. It's actually the very site where Tchaikovsky first performed his 1812 overture. Sadly, it was destroyed by the order of Joseph Stalin in 1931 because he wanted to use the space it took up, as well as several other prominent churches and historical structures, to build a palace of the Soviets. And if you've never heard of the Palace of the Soviets, that's because it actually never got built. World War II broke out, and all the former stones from this church were instead used to build subway stations around Moscow, which you can still see there to this day. At the end of the Soviet Union, the Russian Orthodox Church was given permission to rebuild the church and use the original plans to a T to remake this statement of God's fidelity and promises. Today, it's one of the most inspiring sites in Moscow, and it's a shame I couldn't film inside. But you can easily find YouTube videos that show the church's services and what it looks like inside, and it will, put simply, blow you away. It is on a scale of church that you won't see outside of the Vatican, probably. Outside the church is the bridge over the Moscow River, which is also one of the best sites for couple photos this time of year. You'll be able to see from the bridge the Red October factory, which is the most famous chocolate factory during the Soviet Union, and is still the manufacturer of the most popular hot chocolate powder here. It makes for a good souvenir, by the way. You'll also see the 300th anniversary of Peter the Great statue, which is done by a Georgian artist by the name of Zurab Tsereteli, who, I found out recently, if you were to ask most Russians in Moscow what they think of Zurab, they'll reply with a pretty passionate disgust at his art. They think it's ruining the beauty of their city. But I don't know, I think that this one's pretty sweet. Now the sun is setting, the night has arrived, and you're gonna stroll around various parts of the city a little bit longer, checking out the view from atop bridges and outside the Lenin Library, maybe grabbing some Kofix, which is a very affordable coffee shop when you're here. They're famous for their $1 coffees. And as an additional tip, it's not that cold, but you do get cold standing outside for a long time. And this is a good place for you to stop in when you get a little chilled in your hands, because they're everywhere, they're very cheap, and you can go in, warm up, drink some coffee, and get ready to attack the next part of this plan. Because now you're heading out to the Arbot district. There are two Arbots, and you don't want to mix them up because the new Arbat Street is mostly a street for cars. There's not a lot of businesses, and it is kind of beautiful in its own right. But the real gem is the old Arbat Street. The old Arbot is a kilometer-long street that joins two stations together, and is one of the oldest streets in Moscow. It dates to the 15th century. Napoleon actually marched his troops through this very street during his taking of Moscow in 1812. In the 18th century, the old Arbot was considered by nobles of the time to be the most prestigious place to live. It's like the 91210 of Moscow. Alexander Pushkin famously lived here, as well as a fair share of Russian intelligentsia during the Soviet Union. Probably the most iconic spot here is the famous graffiti wall which appeared in the 90s after the death of famous Russian punk singer Viktor Tsoi. If you're a fan of Kino or a fan of his in general, you probably want to take a photo with this because fans of his has been painting Viktor Tsoi Lives on this wall since he passed away. And it's frequently a site for rappers and Instagram models alike, so it's a big cultural hub. The street as it stands today is full of date night restaurants, souvenir shops, and cheap coffee places like Kofix to warm up. So why not take a stroll down this rich cultural heritage site between two warm stations for the evening? And by evening, I mean just that. This was all done in just one evening in Moscow last Christmas season. And I promised a weekend, which means I'll be completing a part 2 of this where I spent a second day in Vdenkha Park with the Space Museum and what I can only imagine is the world's largest ice skating ring next week. So you'll have to hit that subscribe button down below and maybe that notification bell for when it'll post because I'm a little irregular right now. But anyways, Merry Christmas to one and all. Happy holidays for whatever you celebrate out there. Love hard, love deep, and I will see you in part 2 next week. Bye-bye.